Welcome back to another PCBH Corner. This is, we haven't done one in a while, just you and I.
Yeah, it's been a long...
Almost, I think, since December when we did the one...
Actually, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't it one? Yeah. I don't know if we did one before then or not. But anyway, it's good to be back. And my mind has a interesting, I feel like, question or topic of conversation. And Bridge and I are just coming off of a week where we got to be in nature a lot, do a bunch of hikes, and that usually leads to us talking nonstop about PCBH. And one of the things that came up was this conversation around, a single session mindset, a moment at a time mindset, and particularly with some of the recent experiences that we have. One is our data that came out recently that showed patients that interacted with their BHC for a visit, they rated their perception of provider time spent in the top 1 percentile versus state and regional averages. And for those state and regional averages, a lot of those places aren't doing PCBH and definitely not approaching it from like a single session, a moment at a time. And still though, those patients perceived provider time spent within our organization to be in the top 1% when compared to state and regional averages.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Insane. So want to talk about that a little bit, about how we feel about that data and even some of the relational frames that we have that's difficult. And then the second part is some of the recent trainings and different things that we've been requested to do, which is great. I love these requests about a single session mindset, a moment at a time mindset. And what we're running into a little bit about the challenges of doing those presentations, because it seems like it almost goes against everything a behavioral health provider has been taught.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. Yeah. So where's your mind going?
I think that when we were on our long walks through the beautiful enchanted forests in Cle Elum, Washington, so some of the epiphanies that we had was that it is really, really hard to do skill acquisition when folks aren't in a state where they believe in it, and or there's so many negative relational frames. And so it's interesting because fundamentally, clinicians are so good at understanding that patients might not be able to uptake interventions unless they're in the proper stage of change. So unless you're really in that preparation or action stage, most clinicians, if you ask them about it, they'll say, oh, yeah. You have to help patients get there. You can't start too soon with interventions, especially folks who've been doing this for a while. But isn't it interesting? We somehow lose our minds when it comes with trying to make changes within our organizations. Like somehow the behavioral principles of folks not being ready for change, and what do you have to do to prep that change via the pre-contemplative into the contemplative, somehow isn't there for clinicians.
It's a brilliant observation, and one that we do forget a lot. That, human behavior doesn't stop at a clinician-patient relationship.
Right.
Human behavior transcends, right, about everything. And I think that's a really key point in this, is that and what I do see, and I think it would be a great thing, the single session and a moment at a time approach is going to continue to get talked about more and more because of the realities of just the simple realities that we don't have access for people. Yes, increasing the workforce may help with some of that, and probably won't help as much as we do unless we start changing up.
Yeah, we have to do things differently. The writing's on the wall for that.
And we've been requested for those type of trainings over the past couple of years. Those requests have increased only throughout. And then you start to pair in, so it's not only about like access, it's now about like, some of the data like we have now shows that patients might really like this. Like patients might prefer this. I know I've said this before, I think in another corner. I remember talking with someone the one time, and they weren't a behavioral health provider, but they said they had accessed behavioral health before, and they're like, yeah, it was really stressful, like every week having to come up with what I was going to talk about for an hour. It's like, what would have been better? Like if I could just access them when I needed them.
Right.
And for the moment that I had, right? So there's more and more discussion about maybe patients, that maybe this fits more with the way patients work. The problem is though, as you said, that still doesn't fit well with our schemas, our relational frames of what we've been taught to do as behavioral health providers.
Yeah, in the PCBH Corner we did on the warm and fuzzies, we talked about that. From the very start of our programs, That's all we're focused about is time. Time to get done what you need to get done, time to do diagnostic clarity, time to do treatment plan, time to discuss it. And then there's all the obsession with that time is the best way to show your patients respect, or your clients at the time, is what we would say is like the best way to show your client respect is time. So being on time and then ending on time. And so we have a whole PCBH corner on that. And again, in theory, none of this stuff it's not about this being right or being wrong. This is about maybe we need to just look at things differently. But it seems like maybe directors or leaders or organizations are further out than the workforce. And so they think that it's just merely a skill acquisition. And we see this all the time. You know how we always say that there's like what people are saying and then what they're saying. You know, the message beneath the message. So a lot of requests that we get are teach folks how to do it.
Come in and teach my team to approach this as a single session mindset, in a moment at a time mindset.
Exactly. My team says that they don't have the skill set to do briefer, more targeted, shorter, whatever words we want to use, interventions. And we want you guys to be the ones to teach them that, which I'm down for. And
it's a great time, let me tell you, trying to really convince someone that they don't believe it. Yeah.
And it's a both and. You absolutely do need the skill acquisition. You can't just only come in and have a belief in this. It's almost like you need some level of belief. And then that's the epiphany.
So what would you say, I mean, what suggestions would you give to directors that, and again, what's interesting about this is that we've had both PCBH organizations kind of reach out to us, and we've had traditional mental health reach out to us about, because they recognize the access concern. So what would you suggest to directors to start to do with their teams that, as you said, without question, there's a skill set to this. And whether that be how you introduce yourself, the contextual interview, how you navigate visits, the language that you use throughout, like there's skills and knowledge based to them. That's true.
Yeah, single session therapy has tons of skills, solution-focused brief therapy, tons.
Let's take that, the skill acquisition, maybe put that to the side.
Right.
More about what would you talk to directors about to build up, almost if we use the garden metaphor, right? The skill acquisition, let's just label that's like the seed and the water and the sun and things like that. That's the stuff that will grow. What is the soil components that you feel really allow the seed to uptake, to grow roots? I'm
super interested to see what your soil is, what you would say for your own question. So let's definitely make sure that we get to you.
Yeah.
After I go. Yeah, the soil, I think, is having, it really depends on your context.
Dare we say.
Because if you are coming into, say you're a leader or director, and you're coming new into an organization, and so there was like maybe a pre-existing.
Oh, that's a great point.
Department there, then I would absolutely, and say you're going to want to make the changes, and you're going to be the one like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to be doing something different. You're going to definitely have to have those tough conversations about the whys. You're going to have tough conversations about, or candid conversations about what reservations do people have, and really talk about them explicitly. And I would say get it all out on the table.
Like rumble that out to the fullest extent possible. Ooh.
Absolutely. Because you're going to need to know, what are the hang-ups? And is this truly a situation where it's going to be dead on arrival because it's too far of a distance to go where somebody currently is to being able to switch into this different mindset? Or is it that folks just haven't had much exposure? Which
goes back to, it's like, we need some skill acquisition. Yeah.
Well, yes, skill acquisition, but also there maybe are open-minded. They just haven't had maybe somebody talk to them about like the possibilities of like, well, what could this, look like? But yes, also I agree with you, the skill acquisition as well.
And can I pause you real quick? Remember where your mind's going with this. I love how you said about being able to notice if like there's too big of a gap, and not, it's almost interesting. It's like too big of a gap, not to just overcome. It's not about that. It's like almost you're going to be asking someone to lose a part of themselves to do this work. And I think for both, and there's so many different times, and we've talked about this in other PCBH corners, we should celebrate when people come to the informed consent of like, I just don't think this work is for me. Like, I just don't think this is something that I'm ever going to kind of really
there's
jive
enough
with.
people who need help in enough situations where that you don't have to make something fit.
And I really did love how you said that about like if you're coming into an organization that has established thing and we're making this transition, really having those kind of conversations and not what would the thing be, not giving in to something. It's like, no, this is what we're going to do. And allowing that very beautiful and value-congruent conversation of being like, hey, this might not be for you. And that's okay. That's something that should be celebrated. Let's have that conversation, though. I loved how you said that.
And then if you're in a situation where maybe the program is new and maybe you've been newly appointed as a director and you're kind of charged with growing this thing, then we go back to what we've had a lot of PCBH corners on of the hiring process and really kind of doing your work at the front end. But I think a lot of times there's, the context is completely mixed. There's all kinds of folks that have come there for the integration and like the promise of the new vision. And then there's maybe folks that were kind of already there beforehand when maybe there was a completely different set of visions and circumstances. And so you have so much empathy for them. Like if you were hired and worked in an organization for, a decade, or it doesn't even matter how long, a decent amount of time, where they said, okay, here's our vision and here's the work you're going to do. And then overnight somebody comes in, if this is how it went, and says, okay, we're actually going to do something differently. We're going to do something different. Then it would be like, wait a second. So I think it really does depend on the context, but I think the most important thing to get that soil going is really having those candid conversations, really going into what are the hangups? What are the things that just aren't sitting right? What are the relational frames that are activated? Whether it's most commonly when people hear targeted or brief, they hear not enough time. Or
superficial.
That one story that you had told before where folks were talking about PCBH and we were all pumped up about it, taking all these copious notes and so excited, and you happen to glance over to the person next to you and they wrote on there shitty ass care. And so we have to know what we're walking into, and then put it all out on the table and really, and then the whys. And so I guess this is for anybody who's ever had us do a training for them or for the organization, or maybe a training that we've done at CFHA, and you're kind of like, that's great, Dave and Bridge. But just tell me what to do. I promise you that what we're attempting to do in these situations is we are trying to get the soil ripe so that when we're ready to turn into, okay, what are we actually going to do? It can actually be uptaken.
And that's the thing I love that you said that. It's almost an informed consent process of people reaching out for us for any type of trainings. Is like, we won't do like a skill kind of just, we won't just teach skills.
Yeah.
Because we know that doesn't, or our minds just haven't seen that being effective. And what a lot of times that does is that it seems like it just causes people to disengage. And I love the fact of what you were saying before, and it causes people to disengage and then also get interesting relational frames kind of build up, because what we always say, like, our minds will fill in the information if we don't have it.
Right.
And so if there's not this like conversation about the why and connecting those things, like people's minds are like, oh, this is about just money.
Yeah.
This isn't about like good health care at all. This is about, again, shitty ass care.
And if that is what folks are trying to do, of trying to like just drive up productivity or see more patients for seeing more patients' sake,
Amen,
without a clear vision,
Amen,
then yeah, it is probably going to fall flat. I mean, that's the epiphany that you and I were talking about when we were strolling through the woods.
So if someone reaches out to us because they are thinking this, like, oh, we can drive up productivity, we can drive up finances, like, don't reach out to us about that, because we're not going to be the ones that will be down for that. I think it's such an interesting thing too that you were saying. In my mind had this moment of like, what's the right person for this kind of thing? And what's interesting, where my mind goes, I would love to know where you go, and this goes back to the whys and connecting that. Someone has a value of access, someone has a value of serving the community, maybe the serving of the community, because probably just, there's not a relational frame really within our field about access. We did that corner, as you were saying, on that before. So maybe the language is more like, I have a mission of serving my community. I have a mission of being there for people when they need it. When you start hearing those values, that's where it's like, oh, this is something, a single session, a moment at a time approach might really do well.
Absolutely.
And then when you have someone, because again, it can go both ways. If you have someone that's like, I like to be innovative, I like to try to do things differently. Problem with that though is, right, and this is one of the things that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not to say like, oh, single session in a moment at a time. It's just like, you just get to do whatever you want, right?
Right.
There is science, there's behaviorism and stuff. But if you have someone that's saying, I really do want to be innovative, I really do want to iterate how we provide behavioral health. It's like, that's a ding, ding, ding. It's like, oh, this is a good, maybe potential fit versus someone that's like, very, well, we got to do the protocol. We got to do the thing. And we're going to have Jeff Ryder on a corner because Jeff is doing a lot of great things. He had that great conversation with Kirk. And what was the title of it? Are evidence-based protocols the thing that's going to be like the downfall of our field or something like that?
Right.
And it's an interesting conversation that him and Kirk were able to have. But if you have someone that is like, hey, it has to be like an evidence-based we have to do that in this way. It's like, okay, that might be a difficult thing to really try to erode, or not erode. Erode's not the right word. That might be a difficult match of values.
I was thinking more of the match.
Yeah.
So the question being about like, what do I see would be like a good fit with potential like
what values,
employees?
what things are you think, as you said that one part about like the interview process, like what are you looking to hear for when you're interviewing someone that says, okay, this might be someone that has a mission and a value that might really embrace, that has a soil.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that we actually did a really good corner on that for the interview season one. So a lot of what we had said in there, and we could say it again, that's no problem at all. Like people that are willing to deliver services in non-traditional settings is always like a really, or non-traditional ways, non-traditional settings. So when folks are like, oh yeah, I worked for CPS and we had this amount, we had 3 months to work with a family, or I worked in this hospital and we basically go in and go over a few things, or we did this. Like whenever it's like just kind of a non-traditional setting or non-traditional amount of time, it seems like the jump to working on integrated primary care teams is just a lot easier because there's not a lot of maybe associations tied.
There's been more exposure already to create some of these openings, this flexibility in a sense.
Yeah, and so I would say that when you're building your team, either the team that you've inherited or the team that you're going to be hiring, you have to listen with a grain of salt. Like we were saying before, there's what folks say and then there's what folks mean. And so if you keep running into a situation where you're talking with somebody on your team and they're like, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. To me, I think that's a kind of a, I don't want to say red flag because that has such a negative connotation.
That should give us pause.
It should give that could be a signal.
Correct.
Pause. Signal that maybe the thing that is not, and they might not even have awareness to this.
Correct.
The thing that's maybe not feeling so good is more of an emotional component to doing something differently. And so it's not necessarily, so coming in and be like, more skill acquisition. Maybe what we need to do is have a really candid conversation and explore some of those associations.
Well said. And maybe those are the conversations. And I would say, we've talked about this, and we're going to be doing some trainings about our kind of like our secret ingredients to PCBH. And one of them is like a single session mindset and a moment of an insight, because it allows PCBH, that what we do in PCBH, to make so much more sense within those things. Having those conversations and understanding, like, I need to pause right now. Like, I've had this conversation for like the 15th time. We brought in people to give trainings and different things.
I sent them the CFHA.
I sent them the CFHA. Readings, videos, our videos, right?
And then, yeah.
That's when we should use that as a signal. It's like, maybe we just didn't look at the soil right now. Maybe we didn't look at, is there something, again, a belief, a value, schemas, relational frames, that is causing these conversations just not to be heard. We've talked about this a lot, where with each other, not really on corners, but we talked about this a lot, that we have to remember, people aren't hearing what we're saying. People are hearing what their mind's response is to what we're saying. And as you said, with the shitty ass care comment, you and I are over there being like, this is the best training ever. Like, this is so great. We're hearing the same
Yeah, it's the same presenter.
It's no different presenter.
But it's activating different things in you, me, and the person next to us.
Correct. Completely different things. That's what we have to be able to have these candid conversations. So as directors, to be able to have these candid conversations with teams, like what's getting in the way? What are people's relational frames that are coming up about it? And I would also say, nurture those values and that soil that we want to see kind of really produce. So this would be things, and I know we talk about this regularly. Anytime we put out data, we always share the values that they represent. Anytime that we talk about stories, we make sure that there are these stories that reflect a moment in a time of PCBH. We also, whether it be our monthly rounding, one of the questions is, tell me about a meaningful connection you made with a patient or a family member. And it is amazing to see, oftentimes what the team brings us within those conversations are just a moment. They're not talking about, again, the question is, tell me about a moment that was of connection with a family member or a patient. It's beautiful to hear those stories.
So what I'm hearing you say is that if you're a leader in your organization and you want to, how you asked me, like, what are we going to do to get started? It sounds like what you're saying is to absolutely go deep into the whys, the values, and cultivate those and help make that connection between the mission of PCBH and why we're talking about a single session approach or one at a time approach and mindset. Why are we talking about that within the primary care and setting, and then bridging that, making that bridge between their values and being really curious about it.
And almost, I love that metaphor, almost like us as directors helping build and scaffold the bridge.
Yeah.
To make the connection, to make those things. Because as we were saying before, right, due to our relational frames, we might miss these moments from ever happening. Because if your mind doesn't believe that they can happen, when they do happen, you're not going to see it. You're not going to see it. To be able to make that bridge and really cultivate that together, I love that.
I mean, people are people, or people are people. And I'm having my brain, like right now when you're talking, my brain is like exploding with how obvious this is in the therapeutic setting. With regards to just like, if you've gone over something 10 times, and then the response back is like, I still don't know how to do something. As a clinician, you would pick up on that. You'd be like, oh, maybe you're not ready. Or maybe that there's some other hang up that's going on that's like, because we've gone over what sleep hygiene is. We've gone over how to use the diabetes medication. And this is in the absence of there's, no other difficulties with learning or something of that nature. If it's just a situation where the person absolutely has the health literacy to understand what has gone on, and you've gone over it, maybe like we would know as a clinician that there's probably some emotional aspect.
We'd pick up that signal.
We would
pause a little bit more.
And yes, y'all, this makes your job a lot harder, but as Kirk would say, this is what you get paid the big bucks for. And so if you're a director or you're a leader and you're right out, and I'm going back to Dave and Bridge in 2014, 2016, we thought that basically we had to teach folks how to do integrated care. Like, here's the nuts and bolts, here's how you do it. And then you realize once you've been a director for a while or a leader for a while, that most of what you're dealing with is emotional responses because you know what, again, people are people are people are people. And so maybe the difficulty you're running into isn't necessarily a lack of knowledge. It's that the soil isn't fertile for the knowledge acquisition.
Final two things my mind wants to end with, and you summarized it so well. First one is, before we start talking about skills, let's make sure there's values there. Let's make sure there's a why there. Let's make sure there's a mission there. We can't talk about skills in the absence of those things.
I like that.
It's given a decontextualized assignment that just we're leaving it up to chance if this is going to uptake. Some people are going to get psyched and hyped about it. Other people are going to say that's shitty ass care. We got to make sure there's a context for it. The second thing is, one of the reasons my mind believes we had such success over at CHCW and with PCBH being uptaken and the patients getting the experience they are, because we have a team that believes in it. You can't feel gross about the work you're doing, which also goes back to the first part about you got to have the whys with these areas. One of the most powerful things I think PCBH, and we talk about this a lot, is that you have to do good clinical work. But if you don't believe in the clinical work that you're doing, that's going to show, that's going to ripple, that's going to leak out a lot. This is another reason why there has to be values, That has to be before we start talking about skills, before we're talking about this. Let's make sure this is a value that people have. This is good. Cool. As always, let us know where your mind goes. Let us know thoughts, questions, anything, any final parts that you're...
That was a very natural ending.
Yeah.
So we should do what we
George
do.
Costanza,
and
part of the single session. We're out. All right. Take care.